of nurses leaving the profession in England has hit a record
England's
high.
National Health Service is facing the worst workforce crisis in history as hospitals fall short of doctors and
The largest nursing
nurses.
strike in NHS history is underway, with nurses in England, Wales and Northern Ireland taking part in
The
industrial
inside
action.
story of the Partygate scandal. Boris Johnson joked about being at the country's most unsocially distanced party during an illegal lockdown gathering.
For 75 years, we have lived with a National Health Service. It is the largest employer in the UK and plays an extremely important role in our society. As of recent years, our NHS has been facing inadequate planning and chronic under-resourcing. Within this documentary, I plan to give you the real insight into how our NHS is coping with the immense pressure and stresses that are placed upon them. Resilience is a major trait in which all NHS staff have had to adapt to, and in this documentary it will showcase the reasons why. I will be discussing some of the biggest challenges that currently surround the NHS. These include staff, mental health, the strikes, the government and COVID-19. To gain an insight into the real decline of our NHS, I will be speaking to a nurse who has been in the industry for 17 years.
I'm Zoe Stoughton, I'm a general practice nurse.
How do you remain resilient when working for the NHS?
With me, because I'm working as a general practice nurse, we tend to work alone a lot. The only chance really is if we manage to get a lunch break, speaking to our fellow nurses. But my main thing, I think, to try and shrug the day off, because it's very hard to switch off. To come straight home and go straight out with the dogs, try and clear my head.
What are some of the biggest challenges facing the NHS?
Demand. Demand is the biggest challenge. Resources, finance, they're all huge in the NHS.
The mental health of NHS staff members is not spoken about enough. Many shocking statistics have been released to the public. Staff members have been experiencing extreme mental health struggles as a result of their work. Since the pandemic, 21% of staff have reported high levels of depression, compared with the 5% previous. Stats revealed that one life is lost every 3 days. This is the dark side of the NHS struggles we don't see or hear about. I spoke to Zoe to get insider knowledge of the unspoken mental issues within the job and how she copes.
Have you ever struggled mentally as a result of your work?
Yes, I have. Because of the stress when people are sick, when they're burnt out. Also, patients are a lot more educated and aware of their rights. They're far more demanding when I first went into nursing. That puts a lot more pressure on you.
Would you say it's quite common to struggle with your well-being when working?
Yes, it is. It is, both mentally and physically. The long hours, not having enough time to rehydrate, so you obviously get the health issues plus the mental health issues as well.
What can the NHS do to better the support for their staff?
I think they need to start looking at how they can support their staff better, because we can't afford to lose staff or the knowledge and training, so they need to be addressing this more.
Do you think by improving the mental health services it will overall improve the NHS?
Yes, from what I find from the mental health patients I do see, yes, resources are very stretched. This is an area that really does need addressing.
The NHS industrial strike action is very relevant at the moment, as many have recently taken place. NHS staff believe that the efforts and dedication they put into their jobs are not being rewarded with a fair pay. Since 2010, the average pay for an NHS worker has fallen by 8%, yet the stress and pressures have increased massively, especially during and after the global pandemic. I want to find out why NHS staff feel the need to strike in order to receive a better wage, and if it is their last cry for help. There is a lot of controversy that surrounds NHS strikes, and I wanted to hear Zoe's response to these opinions.
What is your opinion on the NHS strikes and are they justified?
Sadly, I feel they are. Our wages have not changed for a few years now. We've always avoided it because of our compassion and safety and looking after the patients, but I think it's come to a point in the road we've got no choice now, and we've been pushed into this position. We don't want to strike. We have no choice but to strike now.
Tuesday the 11th of April to Saturday the 15th of April 2023 are the dates of the junior doctor 4-day strike. This is said to be one of the biggest NHS strikes in history. Huge disruptions were expected within the NHS, with an estimate of around 350,000 appointments to be cancelled as a result of the walkout. Junior doctors currently count for more than 40% of the medical workforce. The starting wage for a new junior doctor in England could be as low as £14 per hour. This is equivalent to the wages of a prep worker. In 2008, government cut junior doctor wages by 26%. They are demanding for a 35% pay rise. This increase would make up for the pay cut made by the government 15 years ago. This means for new junior doctors that they would be earning an extra £4 per hour. Health Secretary Steve Barclay describes the demand as unrealistic. I attended the strike protest in Trafalgar Square to take some footage and gather interviews. I wanted to explore the reasons for this strike further and speak to the junior doctors themselves. Throughout the day, I was able to understand the struggles these junior doctors are having to go through as a result of the poor pay. I had the opportunity to speak to a few of the doctors to get their opinions on the situation. Why are you here at the protest today?
So with the pay kind of falling with inflation and everything, we've lost loads of staff. The staffing levels are really low, which compromises patient safety. And the main thing for us is that our training opportunities are really decreasing. So we're not getting the same training that people used to 10, 15 years ago, and that compromises patient safety just as much as poor staffing does.
What is it like for an NHS worker to be working in these harsh conditions with such low pay?
It's really tough because it's quite hit and miss. Some days staffing levels are fine and people aren't as poorly as other days, and other days you're not left on your own, but it feels like you're left on your own, and when you're not getting the same duty and training that people used to, you see everyone's in the same position, everyone kind of has to rally together, but it's really tough to kind of keep that morale going, especially over bank holiday and long kind of weekends.
The Health Secretary Steve Barclay has described the demand as unrealistic and has said that the strikes have been planned to cause maximum disruption. How would you reply to him?
I would say you can't say these things in retaliation to us stacking them up against the bank holiday weekend, because things are already rough as it is. They're even more rough on a bank holiday weekend, and wherever we place our strikes is going to cause lots of disruption. That's the point.
Finally, can you give a summary of why the public should support the strikes and the pay rise?
So the strikes are for them as much as it is for us. It's to help us have a work-life balance. It's to help us be able to fill our rotas properly so that there's enough staff to be able to look after you and your family come in. And it's not just the junior doctors that need this. It's our nursing staff, our therapy staff and our admin staff that need better pay and better conditions so that we can all keep going and give better care.
There is a real and genuine workforce crisis happening right now, where thousands of junior doctors and other NHS workers and nurses and physios are leaving the NHS by the day, and they're all going to Australia and New Zealand and Canada, where they're being paid fairly, where the working conditions are better, where the training opportunities are better. So it's in their interest, because if the NHS continues the way it is, there won't be an NHS to treat the public in the future, and there won't be doctors to treat the NHS to treat the public in the future.
How do junior doctors remain so resilient despite the low pay?
It's hard, but it's something that we've worked really hard for, spent a long time training to get here in medical school, and I really enjoy my job, and I think it's a real privilege that we've had this opportunity. So I think that kind of keeps me going through it all.
Junior doctors are said to be earning as low as £14 an hour. What are your opinions on this?
So I think often we're compared to other occupations who get £14 an hour. We just think foundation doctors should be getting more because they've done 5 years of medical training. They've got debts of £70,000, £80,000 and more. Their job description is making choices of life and death.
Finally, can you give a summary of why the public should support the strikes and the pay rises?
So part of the reason that we're striking is because we actually want to protect the NHS. We have doctors and colleagues leaving the NHS who've trained here. They're amazing doctors and we're losing them to other countries. They're going to Canada, the States, Australia, New Zealand. Nurses are leaving and we're recruiting less doctors and less nurses from here. So part of the reason we want this pay restoration is because we want these doctors to stay, we want these nurses to stay. We want to protect our NHS.
What motivates you to support the strikes?
I think what motivates me as well is the way the public are actually. They've been very supportive and that makes you feel more valued. The public, I would say, have making me feel more valued through the strikes.
What is the main issue that led to the strikes?
It's been piling up for some time. It's the shortage of staff, the long hours, poor pay. And with all the financial problems we have now, with the utility bills, the food bill, everything, something's got to give. And unfortunately, we've had to go on strike.
Would you say the pay really does affect how you work within the NHS and your mental health?
Yes, it does. It does.
What message would you like to send to the public about the reasons for the strikes?
To the public, I'd say we haven't taken this lightly. If we don't strike now and try and prove everything that we're fighting for, it's going to get worse. We've been put in this position. This is our chance. We've got to try and make a stand and get the government to listen.
How would you respond to the public who don't agree with the strikes?
I'd be looking at asking them why. What is it they don't believe in? Safety all the way through. People will not be put at risk. Ultimately, as they know, if there was a situation in a strike and there was a big major incident or something, then obviously that will be priority.
Would you say the striking affects it long term?
Yes, ultimately. There's a lot of damage. We've got to catch up from the pandemic. That is causing a lot of pressure as well. It's not just that everyday job now. We've also got to mop up the last 2 years. We've not enough staff.
The NHS is owned by our government. It's our government who makes the decisions on how much funding goes into the NHS and how much the staff are paid. A lot of society blame our government for the NHS decline. Is it their lack of funding that is destroying our healthcare service? Is it the government's fault that doctors and nurses are on strike? Could the government have handled the pandemic better? I spoke to Zoe and got her opinions surrounding the topics. What is your opinion of the government's handling of the NHS?
I don't think they're listening. That's why we're in a strike now. They need to start listening. The people on the ground can see what's going on far more because we're hands-on. They need to be listening to us down on the floor.
Should they be paying staff more and putting in more funding?
Yes, we can't survive on our pay now. Cost of living is just horrendous now. There's nurses on food banks, just like the public as well. People forget, yes, we're nurses, but at the end of the day, we're the same as everybody else. We've got those same problems, the same pressures as everybody else on top of the job.
How does it make you feel, the fact the pay does not match the effort?
I feel undervalued, I don't feel appreciated, and a lot more of us are actually looking to leave. Sadly, we're going to lose a lot of experienced staff.
Would you agree that the government are lacking empathy for NHS staff?
Yes, I think that's how we're all feeling, and I think that's another twist on the strike. Nobody's listening. We've been forced into this position. We don't want to be in this position.
What are your opinions on the government's behaviours during the pandemic?
I was quite concerned about it. Obviously, we had to rely on what the government was coming out. There was a lot of mixed messages to start with. It was very carte blanche. When people were speaking out about any concerns, even quite high up, physicians and everything, it was very hushed up. And really, with all the mixed messages, you really weren't quite sure at first what was going on, what guidelines. I think it could have been handled a bit better, and I think it should have been quite clear from the start.
If you could describe them feelings in one word, what would it be?
Concerning.
Following on from the previous two questions, I wanted to ask members of the public about their views on the government's behaviours during the pandemic.
I think they made one rule for everyone else, the public, general public, and one rule for themselves. They didn't, follow their own rules.
Well, I think they handled the situation quite well compared to other countries. It's just a shame that they didn't all follow the rules, especially the Prime Minister, who should be setting an example.
Can you describe your feelings in one word?
Selfish.
Disappointment.
As the pandemic of coronavirus claims more lives around the world, the people of the United Kingdom are now being advised to make drastic changes to their day-to-day existence. Prime Minister Boris Johnson rejected criticism that his government had been slow to respond to the scale of this crisis. Mr. Johnson said now was the moment to stop all non-essential contact with other people and to avoid all non-essential travel.
It's not uncommon at the moment that I've come to work, I've walked into the unit to find nurses crying. The physical and mental load is huge, and I'm really worried that we're going to break a lot of nurses.
In March 2020, we all knew about the coronavirus and how severe its effects were having around the world. The virus soon spread and became a global pandemic. All doctors and nurses around the world were being tested. They put themselves at risk to help deliver care to their patients. Most were trying their best to care and survive whilst lacking resources, and this results in an environment full of anxiety and stress. In the UK, it was officially announced that the pandemic had ended on May 5th this year. All areas of our healthcare system had been affected, and our NHS are still dealing with the backlog and effects that COVID-19 had on them to this day. I spoke to Zoe to understand how she handled the COVID working conditions and restrictions. I wanted to know the effects which working during a global health crisis had on the mental health of staff.
Did you work during COVID?
I did. I had to travel all the way up to Coventry and stay in hotels, which was very difficult because everything was locked down, so it was hard to find a hotel, but of course there was no food or anything, so it was difficult. Everybody had to just pitch in. Having to work away as well made it very, very difficult during lockdown.
What was your experience working within the pandemic?
Lots of fear I noticed in the patients, obviously trying to relay their fears somewhat. What with the mixed messages, then when they come in they're asking us. It was really, really difficult, very difficult time.
What were the most stressful parts?
A lot of my day-to-day jobs that I needed to do in my clinics, I couldn't because I couldn't physically be present with them. It was harder because you were doing a lot of things on the phone, which goes against all my nursing principles because I use all my senses with the patient in front. Everything completely changed, basically overnight.
If you could sum up what working was like in a global pandemic, what would that be?
Scary.
What were the scariest parts of it?
It was an unprecedented time. It was extremely difficult, a very interesting time.
How has COVID changed the NHS and how it works? Do you think it's had a big effect?
It's had a huge effect because everybody's drawbridges came up. It was like a panic. But it was a time you had to think on your feet and work around it as best you could for your patients.
How does resilience relate to your experience within the NHS and your work as a nurse?
My family's been a great source of that because it's very, very hard. We need to start looking at the well-being of our staff now as well as the patients because equally we are as important. If we're not helped, we'll burn out and you will lose more staff.
There is a lot of conversation at the moment about the decline of our National Health Service and if it will exist in our future. It is important to raise awareness of staff well-being and resilience as it is vital within the job and we need NHS staff to keep it running. I wanted Zoe's thoughts on the matter and if she believes there is hope for our NHS in the future.
What are your opinions on the future of our NHS? Do you see it in our future?
I would like to think so. This is something we're very proud of and we're very fortunate to have. I am concerned, very concerned with the way things have changed, how it's affecting the NHS and whether we will still have an NHS.
By the route it's heading now, do you think that we will still have an NHS?
People are very passionate. That's the one thing we have to keep going. People are very passionate, the public are very passionate. We have got to fight to keep this NHS alive.
The NHS will always be a necessity for the UK as it has been for so many years. The truth of our NHS is beginning to unravel as we discover the decline. But I hope from this documentary you now have a deeper insight into how staff cope with pressures and how they have remained resilient for so many years. To show your support to our NHS, you can visit nhscharitiestegether.co.uk. They are a charity which helps the NHS go further and provides the extra support needed for staff, patients and communities.